You won't believe what this police dog brought home through the snow. A blizzard, a lonely officer ready to give up, and a German shepherd who refused to leave something dying behind. What he carried in his jaws that night wasn't just a wounded bobcat kitten. It was a miracle sent straight from God. This story will shatter your heart and heal it again. Watch till the end. You'll never look at loyalty, faith, or God's timing the same way again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Snow came down like ash from a torn heaven. By midnight, the town of Silver Pine was nothing but white silence and flickering power lines. Inside the small police outpost near the frozen lake, Officer Jake Miller sat alone at his desk, the dim emergency light painting tired shadows across his face. He was 33, broad-shouldered, but lean from years of patrol in mountain towns where danger came slower, but cut deeper. His dark brown hair was overgrown, a few silver threads at the temples. Too young for that, people said. The truth was simple. Worry had aged him more than time ever could. Stacks of unpaid bills hid beneath a folder marked "Transfer. Approved." Tomorrow, he was supposed to leave Silver Pine for a city posting, a chance at higher pay and lower memories. But even as he packed the last of his things into a cardboard box, he couldn't shake the ache that came with leaving this frozen town, the place where his mother had died, where he'd buried too many canine partners, and where silence had become his only friend. At the corner of the room, Ranger, his German shepherd, stirred. The dog was large and muscular, a deep tan coat fading to black along the spine, eyes amber and watchful. He was 8 now, retired officially, but neither of them had learned how to rest. A faint scar ran across Ranger's muzzle, a reminder of an old raid gone wrong, when Jake's first partner had been killed. Since that night, Jake had stopped smiling easily. The radio hissed static. Outside, the wind howled, throwing ice against the windows like handfuls of sand. Jake rubbed his eyes, muttering, "One more night, buddy. Then we're done." But Ranger didn't settle. He sat up, ears pricked toward the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not the kind that came from fear, but instinct. Jake frowned. "What is it?" Ranger paced to the window, claws tapping against the tile, tail rigid. When the power blinked out completely, plunging the room into darkness, Jake felt the familiar tug in his chest, that old pull between duty and exhaustion. He grabbed his flashlight, its weak beam slicing through the dark. "All right, let's check it out." They stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a wall, bitter and alive. Snow crunched beneath Jake's boots as Ranger pulled ahead, nose low to the ground. The flashlight caught flakes swirling like ghosts. Every breath burned cold. "Easy, Ranger!" Jake shouted over the wind, but the dog didn't stop. He darted toward the chain-link fence behind the station, barking sharply. Jake followed, heart hammering. There, half buried near the broken fence post, was a small shape trembling against the snow. At first, Jake thought it was a squirrel, or maybe a raccoon, until Ranger crouched and nosed it gently into the open light. It was a bobcat kitten, no more than a few months old. Tiny, half the size of Ranger's head. Its fur was matted with ice and streaked with blood along one leg. A frayed, red nylon cord clung to its neck like a cruel collar. The kitten tried to hiss, but it came out as a faint gasp. Jake knelt, breath fogging the air. "Oh, you poor thing." Ranger whined softly and began to lick the kitten's fur, melting the frost. The small creature twitched, but didn't fight. Something about the way it trembled, half wild and half trusting, caught Jake in the chest like a hook. He took off his patrol jacket and wrapped the kitten inside, pressing it to his chest. The tiny heart fluttered weakly against his shirt. Ranger circled once, standing between Jake and the storm, tail low, protective. Snow collected on his back, on Jake's hair, on the shape bundled against his body. "Let's get you inside." Back in the station, Jake lit the portable heater and laid the bundle on his lap. The kitten's breathing was shallow, eyes barely open. One golden, one clouded with injury. When Jake brushed away the blood, he saw the wound was from a snare, the kind hunters used to trap wild animals illegally. He felt his jaw tighten. Someone did this on purpose. He remembered the red nylon cords that had shown up in past cases, an investigation the sheriff had quietly told him to drop. "No leads. Let it go," they'd said. But now, staring at this half-frozen creature, he realized the truth had never gone anywhere. It was right here, bleeding on his lap. He tore an old shirt into strips, cleaning the wound with disinfectant, whispering softly, "Hang in there, little one." Ranger lay beside him, head resting on Jake's boot, watching every move. When the kitten let out a small cry, Ranger nudged it gently with his nose, as if sharing courage. Jake smiled faintly, the first real smile in weeks. "Guess you found yourself a job again, huh?" He poured some warm water into a cup and let the kitten lick from his fingertip. Its tongue was rough, stubborn. "You're a fighter," he murmured. "We'll call you Ember. The name felt right. Small, bright, and refusing to die. Outside, the blizzard raged harder. The roof creaked under the weight of snow. Yet inside the tiny outpost, the air seemed to soften. Jake leaned back, jacket still wrapped around the kitten, Ranger curled at his feet. For the first time in months, he felt purpose stirring again, like a spark refusing to go out. He looked down at Ranger, who was already watching him, eyes steady, ears twitching at each gust of wind. "You did good, boy," Jake whispered. "You always know what matters." Somewhere deep in the storm, a branch cracked and fell, echoing through the valley. Ranger lifted his head, but didn't move. Jake closed his eyes, hand on the small rise and fall beneath his coat. In that fragile warmth, beneath the scream of the blizzard, Jake knew this was no coincidence. This was a message. And tomorrow, he would have to answer it. Morning came gray and slow, the storm's roar replaced by the drip of melting ice from the roof. Inside Jake's cramped apartment, above the local diner, the air smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. Ranger lay by the door, a silent wall of fur and vigilance. On the couch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, the small bobcat kitten, Ember, slept in a tight ball, one paw twitching as if chasing something in a dream. Jake stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. His uniform shirt hung half-buttoned, wrinkled from a night without rest. "Yeah, this is Officer Miller," he said, voice low. "I found an injured bobcat near the station last night. Thought I should report." The voice on the other end was calm, but detached. "This line's restricted, officer. You should bring the animal in immediately. Don't get involved." Jake frowned. "Who is this?" But the call ended in a soft click, followed by static. Ranger's ears flicked. He growled, just once. Jake pocketed the phone, unease settling in. He poured warm water into a shallow bowl for Ember. The kitten stirred, blinking open one golden eye. It was a strange sight, half wild, yet fragile, its fur streaked with pale gray and tawny spots, like frost and fire living side by side. It stretched weakly, revealing the stitched bandage Jake had made the night before. "You're tougher than you look," Jake murmured. "Hang in there." A knock rattled the door. Ranger was on his feet in an instant, hackles up. Jake peeked through the peephole. A tall man stood in the hallway, early 40s, square-jawed, cheeks rough with stubble, wearing a long brown trench coat with a patch that read, "Wildlife Rescue Service." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Jake opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" Officer Miller? The man asked. His voice was deep, practiced, too smooth. Name's Rick Lawson. We got a call from the ranger station about a wounded bobcat. Mind if I take a look? Lawson handed over a laminated ID. The logo looked official at first glance, but the font was off, the seal smudged. Jake's gut clenched. Who sent you? State Wildlife Division, Lawson replied casually, stepping closer. You know how it is. Can't leave wild predators in civilian homes. Could cause accidents. Before Jake could respond, Ranger moved. The shepherd stepped between them, teeth bared, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Easy, dog, Lawson muttered, holding up his hand. But his sleeve slipped just enough to reveal a tattoo curling around his wrist. A snake coiled around a fishhook. Jake's eyes sharpened. He'd seen that mark in case files, symbols of a poaching ring tied to illegal animal trade. Nice ink, Jake said evenly. Lawson froze, realizing the mistake. His friendly act faltered. Look, officer, I'm just trying to do my job. Jake nodded slowly. So am I. He shut the door. Hard. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the sound of boots retreating down the hallway. Ranger stayed by the door, still growling softly. Jake exhaled. Guess that confirms it. He walked to the couch, checking Ember's breathing. The kitten stirred, pressing its nose against his hand. There was something trusting in the gesture, and it hit Jake deeper than he expected. He scratched behind its ear gently. Don't worry. No one's taking you. That night, the storm returned in whispers of wind and sleet. Jake sat by the window with Ranger lying across the threshold like a sentinel carved from shadow. The apartment was dim except for the faint orange glow from a desk lamp. Ember dozed near the heater, tiny chest rising and falling. A sharp crack broke the quiet, glass shattering. A rock rolled across the floor, scattering shards near the wall. Jake ducked, heart racing, hand going to his holster. He peered outside. Nothing but darkness and the empty street below. Ranger barked once, deep and furious. Ember startled awake, a frightened chirp escaping its throat. Jake scooped the kitten up, holding it close. Shh. It's okay, he whispered, but his voice trembled. Someone out there knew. They'd marked him now. The phone buzzed once, with an unknown number. Jake stared at it, then let it ring out. He turned to Ranger, who hadn't moved an inch, gaze locked on the window. We're in this together, old friend, Jake said quietly. No one touches her, not while we're breathing. Ranger wagged his tail once, just once, then returned to his silent guard. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the echo of unseen footsteps fading into the snow. The next morning was deceptively calm. Silver pine wore a thin coat of sunlit frost, but Jake could feel the tension humming beneath the quiet, like an electric wire about to snap. Ranger paced the apartment restlessly, claws clicking on the wooden floor. The German shepherd's nose twitched, his gaze fixed on the door, as if waiting for a command Jake hadn't yet spoken. Ember, still limping but stronger, crouched inside a cardboard box lined with blankets. Her golden eyes followed Ranger with alert curiosity. Every so often, she would make a faint chuffing sound, a wild echo of her species, a reminder that she didn't belong in walls or cages. Jake zipped up his jacket, checked his sidearm, and muttered, "All right, boy. Let's see where this takes us." They followed the trail Ranger had caught just before dawn, a scent buried under layers of pine resin and diesel smoke. The path wound through the frozen back roads toward the outskirts of town, where an old lumber warehouse stood, long abandoned after the logging company's collapse years ago. Its windows were boarded, roof half caved, and the forest had started reclaiming it, creeping moss swallowing the metal walls. Jake parked the truck behind a stand of fir trees and cut the engine. The silence was immense. Ranger jumped out first, muscles rippling beneath his winter coat, nose low to the ground. He sniffed, once, twice, then turned his head sharply toward the loading ramp. Jake followed his line of sight. Fresh tire tracks cut through the thin crust of snow. "Somebody's been here," he whispered. They moved carefully. Jake crouched low, flashlight off. The old building creaked under the weight of the wind. Inside, dust motes floated like ghosts in the faint shafts of light sneaking through the cracks. Ranger halted beside a pile of broken crates, pawing at the floorboards. Jake knelt, brushing away a layer of sawdust, and froze. Beneath it was a trap door made of metal, half rusted, but recently used. He pulled it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and a wave of cold air spilled out, sharp with the smell of chemicals and animal musk. A narrow ladder led down into a sub-level storage pit, a cold cellar. Jake descended slowly, Ranger right behind him. The beam of his flashlight swept across rows of cages, traps, coils of red nylon cord, and a stack of black cases stamped with serial numbers. In the far corner, a blinking signal transmitter pulsed red. "Jesus," Jake breathed. He opened one of the cases, Inside were dozens of small metal tags, each engraved with tracking codes. Ember's faint mew drew his attention. She had wriggled free from the blanket in his satchel and was sniffing the air, pupils wide. Her tiny nose quivered toward the far wall. Jake followed her gaze and saw it. Scratches on the concrete, faint paw prints larger than hers. A bobcat adult, maybe her mother, had been here recently. The thought hit him like a punch. She'd been captured, maybe worse. Then, a noise above, footsteps, 2 voices, male. Jake's pulse spiked. He switched off the flashlight. Ranger stiffened, ears pricked. "Told you not to leave the beacon running," one man hissed. His accent was local, rough-edged. "They'll track it." A deeper voice answered, calm and cruel. "Relax. The shipment leaves tonight. After that, nobody's left to ask questions." Through the cracks in the floorboards, Jake glimpsed them. 2 poachers. One was tall and gaunt, face hollow, bearded and unkempt, with a permanent squint from years of working under harsh sun. The other, heavier, wore a red hunting cap and carried a rifle casually over his shoulder. Jake's mind raced. No backup, no signal. Just him, a wounded bobcat kitten, and a dog who'd never learned to quit. He pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the gear and transmitter. Ranger, crouched, silent as breath, waiting for his cue. But fate never waits long. The heavier man's boot stomped on the hatch, making it clang. "Wait," the tall one said. "You hear that?" Ranger's lips curled, a soft growl building in his throat. Then everything happened at once. The hatch flung open, light poured in, and the tall man shouted, "There!" Ranger launched himself upward, a blur of tan and black fury. He hit the man square in the chest, knocking him backward. Gunfire exploded, echoing in the metal walls. Jake ducked, clutching Ember to his chest, sprinting toward the side exit ladder. "Go, Ranger!" he yelled. Ranger barked once, understood, and darted toward the opposite side, drawing the gunman's fire away. Jake shoved through the emergency door, snow slicing his face, adrenaline burning. He vaulted into his pickup, slamming the door. Ranger's bark echoed behind him. Then, a blur in the mirror. The shepherd racing through the snow, teeth bared, something glinting in his mouth. Jake realized it was one of the tracking tags from the transmitter. The last piece of proof. He threw the truck into gear, heart pounding, as Ranger leapt into the bed just as the engine roared to life. The warehouse shrank in the mirror, its shadow swallowed by the trees. Inside the cab, Ember pressed weakly against Jake's chest. Trembling, but alive. Ranger lay down behind them, panting, muzzle flecked with snow, but eyes burning with victory. Jake gripped the wheel. "We've got them now," he said softly. "We finally have them." The drive to Pinecrest Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was long and quiet. Snowmelt streamed along the ditches, glinting like broken glass under the morning sun. Jake kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the small carrier in the passenger seat, where Ember lay curled inside a blanket. The kitten was stronger now. She blinked at the light, nose twitching at every scent that drifted through the cracked window. In the back seat, Ranger sat upright, chest broad, eyes focused on the road ahead. The German Shepherd was streaked with dirt and bruised from the warehouse escape, but his gaze held the same steady fire. Jake glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You did good, partner. Real good." The rehab center appeared beyond a curtain of mist. A low, rustic building made of timber and glass, standing at the edge of Pinecrest Lake, where flocks of geese cut through the clouds above. Waiting outside was Dr. Ruth Alvarez, the head veterinarian. She was in her early 40s, with olive skin, long dark hair, tied back under a wool cap, and eyes that carried both sharp intelligence and a hint of weariness. Ruth had spent 15 years working rescue in remote areas. Hurricane Katrina, California wildfires, the Montana blizzards. Those years had etched faint lines around her mouth, not from age, but from seeing too much suffering. When Jake stepped out, she gave him a quick once-over. Mud-stained boots, torn jacket, exhaustion written in every movement. "You look like you wrestled a bear," she said. "Something close," he replied. Ruth crouched to peer inside the carrier. Ember hissed softly, her wild instincts flaring. Ruth smiled faintly. "A bobcat kitten. Maybe 3 months old. You weren't kidding." "She's been through hell," Jake said. "Caught in a snare. I patched her up best I could." "You did well," Ruth said, voice gentle but firm. "Her leg injury looks like soft tissue damage, no broken bones, but she needs space to stay wild. No cuddling, no petting, no milk, just quiet." Jake nodded, eyes fixed on the tiny creature who'd somehow changed everything. Ruth carried Ember inside to a sterile observation room. Through the glass, Jake watched her clean the wound, apply new bandages, and set the kitten inside a small enclosure filled with pine needles and straw. Ember limped a few steps, then crouched, tail flicking. Even injured, she had the proud posture of a queen. Behind Jake, Ranger sat still as stone. His reflection in the glass looked almost human, patient, solemn, and heavy with understanding. He didn't whine, didn't paw the door. He simply watched. A soldier, respecting a boundary. Ruth joined him a few minutes later, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "She'll make it," she said softly. "Most wouldn't." Jake exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "Guess we were lucky." "No," Ruth replied, her gaze lingering on Ranger. "You were loyal. That's rarer than luck." Jake's phone buzzed, a text from Officer Denny Harper, his old partner from the precinct. "They're in custody. Full confession. That tracker tag cracked the case. You and Ranger just cleaned out the whole nest." Jake smiled faintly. "They got them." Ruth looked relieved. "Then maybe this town can breathe again." They stepped outside, into the open air. The lake mirrored the fading gray clouds, and the pines whispered softly as the wind passed through. Ranger's nose lifted. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. Then he trotted toward the back trail behind the center. Jake followed. There, on a patch of melting snow, were fresh paw prints, larger than embers, spaced far apart, moving toward the forest ridge. Ranger sniffed them, tail low but wagging gently. Jake knelt beside him, hand resting on the shepherd's neck. "Her mother?" Ranger looked up, meeting his eyes. He didn't need to answer. Jake took a deep breath, the air sharp with pine and thawing earth. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. Not victory, not justice, just quiet understanding. Some things didn't need to be owned to be saved. Behind them, Ruth called, "You did good, officer, both of you. Sometimes saving one life means setting it free." Jake turned to look back through the clinic window. Ember was awake, standing on all fours, testing her leg. Her small body trembled, but she held her head high. And through the glass, Ranger remained still, watching her, guarding her, until the wild called her back. Spring came quietly to Silver Pine. The last of the snow melted into silver rivulets that ran down the forest slopes, feeding moss and ferns that glistened under the new sun. The sharp scent of pine filled the air, mingled with damp earth and the faint hum of life returning. At the Pinecrest Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the cages along the outdoor enclosures stood open for the first time in months. A few foxes blinked at the daylight. A hawk flexed its wings for the wind. In the far pen, Ember paced in circles, stronger and sleeker now, her spotted fur shimmering with reddish gold. The small band around her leg, a temporary GPS tag, blinked faintly, a promise that she would never be truly lost. Jake stood by the wooden railing, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, the warmth of the sun softening the weary lines on his face. His once dark hair now bore the hint of a lighter streak. Sun-bleached, perhaps, or simply the trace of long days outdoors. There was a steadiness in him now, something that hadn't been there before. Not the cold detachment of a man just surviving, but the quiet assurance of someone who had found purpose again. Beside him, Ranger sat tall, fur brushed clean, eyes alert, but gentle. He was aging. Jake could see it now in the flecks of gray around his muzzle, but still carried himself like the soldier he had always been. He watched Ember's every movement, tail twitching once in silent pride. "Ready, boy?" Jake asked softly. Ranger tilted his head, and in that small motion was the memory of every patrol, every storm, every night they'd spent holding the line together. From behind them, Officer Denny Harper approached, holding a clipboard. He was a solid man in his late 30s, sandy hair trimmed short, the kind of smile that creased his entire face. Denny had been Jake's partner years ago, before an on-duty accident left him with a limp and a quiet fear of letting others down. Now, he worked as a field coordinator for the new Wildlife Task Force. "Everything's cleared," Denny said, glancing toward the pen. "Vet says she's ready." Jake nodded. "Let's do it." The gate creaked open. Ember hesitated, nose twitching, ears flicking toward the forest beyond the wire. The world outside smelled different now. Alive, dangerous, free. From the ridge above the center, a group of rangers stood watch. Among them was Ruth Alvarez, still wearing her worn-in jacket, her dark braid whipping in the breeze. Her expression was calm, but her eyes shone with quiet pride. Jake crouched down near the open gate, giving Ember one last look. "Go on, little fire," he whispered. "Time to go home." Ranger gave a low bark, 3 short notes, deep and steady. From the distant brush, a rustle answered. A figure emerged, a bobcat, lean but powerful, fur a blend of tawny and gray. Her ribs showed faintly under her coat, and a healed scar crossed one flank, but her eyes burned gold, sharp and alive. Ember froze, then chirped, a soft, high sound that split the air like a heartbeat. The mother lowered her head, sniffed once, and let out a throaty growl that melted into something gentler. Ranger didn't move. He stood still, tail low, head slightly bowed, as if acknowledging another guardian. The mother bobcat's gaze met his for a long second, a silent understanding between predator and protector. Then she turned, nudging Ember toward the trees. The kitten looked back once. Jake felt something tighten in his chest, the kind of ache that was half sorrow, half joy. Then Ember bounded after her mother, disappearing into the green world that had always belonged to her. The forest swallowed the sound of their steps, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pines. Jake rested his hand on Ranger's neck. "Good job, buddy," he said quietly. "You brought her home." At that moment, Denny's radio crackled. "Miller, you there?" Jake lifted the receiver. "Go ahead. Town Hall wants to see you. They're forming an official Silver Pine Animal Rescue Unit. They want you to head it up." Jake looked at Ranger, who wagged his tail once as if already giving his approval. He smiled. "Tell them yes." Ruth approached, standing beside him, hands on her hips. "So," she said, her voice carrying that dry humor only tired heroes share. "Looks like you're not leaving town, after all." Jake looked out at the forest where Ember had vanished, sunlight glinting off the lake beyond. "Guess not," he murmured. "Some places, they remind you why you stayed alive." Ranger pressed his head against Jake's hand, eyes half closed, and for the first time in a long time, Jake Miller didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a man finally walking toward his purpose. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in a flash of light or the sound of angels. Sometimes, they come quietly, on 4 paws, through a storm, carrying something small and wounded in their jaws. Jake thought he was saving a life that night. But in truth, God was using that moment to save his. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, no matter how cold the night, is a doorway where heaven reaches down to touch the earth. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it. The echo of grace in a dog's bark, the warmth of mercy in a man's heart, and the whisper of hope in the wind over Pinecrest Lake. So wherever you are tonight, hold on to faith. Believe that goodness still walks among us. And when life feels frozen, remember that God's light can find you, even in the snow. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment about your own miracle. Subscribe to our channel. And may God bless and protect every soul watching this right now.